All right, so today we're diving deep into something that I think a lot of people can relate to,
Yeah, okay.
which is how do you communicate effectively, but with empathy in public service,
Hmm. Mm.
especially when you have all these legal things you have to worry about.
Yeah.
And so specifically, we're going to be looking at a case study from the Housing Authority of Baltimore City,
Oh, wow.
HABC,
Okay.
back in 1987.
All right.
So think about, you know, you've probably gotten a letter from some government agency at some point in your life,
Oh, for sure.
and you're just kind of like, ugh, this is just so
It's like
impersonal.
doing the form letter, right?
Right? Yeah,
Mm.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so this deep dive is all about exploring those challenges of like, how can we do better, especially when it's a really high stakes situation.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think what's interesting about this case is that it really gets at that tension that exists between those legal obligations that you were talking about and taking this more human-centered approach.
Exactly.
And then the setting itself just adds another layer of complexity.
Right, because we're talking about Baltimore in the late 80s.
Yeah.
So what was the context like back then?
Well, Baltimore was dealing with a lot of issues back then. I mean, high poverty rates, especially among children.
Right.
Housing affordability was a major problem, and so HABC played a really critical role in providing safe and affordable housing for many families.
Okay.
But at the same time, they were also operating in the shadow of this landmark legal case, Thompson v. HUD.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I remember reading about this.
Mm-hmm.
This is a huge lawsuit that alleged racial discrimination in Baltimore's public housing system.
Exactly.
And it really kind of shook things up at HEVC.
Yeah, for sure.
So how did that impact their day-to-day operations?
Well, so the Thompson v. HUD case ended up leading to this court-ordered settlement,
Okay.
and it required HABC to make all these changes to their policies and procedures.
Wow.
So basically, everything they did, especially their communication with tenants, had to be very carefully examined
Oh, wow.
to make sure that there wasn't even the appearance of favoritism or discrimination.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of pressure.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, I can't even imagine what that would be like for the HABC staff to be trying to meet the needs of this vulnerable population. But then every single thing you do, every letter, is under a legal microscope.
Right, and that's exactly where our case study comes in.
Okay.
So we have this tenant, Sharon Packard, and she sends this desperate plea for a transfer.
Oh, wow.
And she's living in this public housing unit where strangers are running into her home to escape the police.
What?
Yeah, there are shootings in the courtyard, and her 5-year-old son is terrified to even go outside.
Oh, my gosh.
It's a really heartbreaking situation.
That's awful.
Yeah, and she had been trying for months to get a transfer, but
Yeah.
she just kept getting silence.
Wow.
So as like a last resort, she ends up reaching out to her congressman.
Oh, wow. So now the pressure is really on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now HEBC is under pressure to respond quickly, and they have to get it right.
Yeah. And I imagine this is where the real challenge comes in. Because how do you write a letter that is legally sound, but is also empathetic to this woman who is clearly facing this awful crisis?
Absolutely. That's a tough situation.
Yeah.
And that's really what this case study is all about.
Okay, so let's put ourselves in the shoes of the HABC staff member who is tasked with writing this response.
Okay.
I mean, you've got these legal guidelines, time pressures, you're trying to address her real fears.
Yeah, it's a lot to balance.
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in for sure.
Absolutely. And I think you can really see that reflected in the first draft of the letter,
Okay.
which is really interesting because it sticks very closely to legal language
Okay.
and focuses a lot on process and fairness.
So what does it say?
So it starts by saying, "This letter is in response to your recent inquiry regarding your desire to transfer.
Okay.
According to our records, you submitted a transfer request, and it has been processed by your management office and forwarded to the housing application office."
It's so formal.
Yeah, it's very formal.
But impersonal.
Yeah, it's like a standard form letter.
Yeah, to like check it off the boxes, right?
Right, exactly. Like they're making sure that they're following all the rules and showing that they're being fair,
Mm-hmm.
but it's missing something.
Yeah, there's no like human touch to it.
Exactly.
And I can see why they would write it that way. I mean, they're trying to be careful,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, they're in a tough position.
To not get in trouble.
Exactly.
But if I were in her shoes,
Yeah.
I would not feel reassured at all after all this waiting, and then this is what I get.
Right, and that's what's so interesting about this case study.
All right.
Because the public servant who wrote this letter, they also felt like something wasn't right.
Really?
Yeah, like they had followed all the rules,
Okay.
but they knew that it wasn't really serving Sharon's needs.
So what do? Did they just send it anyway?
No, they didn't.
Okay.
They decided to try a different approach.
Okay. I'm interested to hear what they did.
Yeah, so instead of just seeing a case file, They started thinking about Sharon sitting in front of them, just desperate for help. And they thought about, like, what would I want someone to do if this was my own niece, who also lives in public housing?
Wow. That's a really powerful shift in perspective.
Right. It goes from being detached to really thinking about the person.
Right, from professional to empathy.
Exactly. And that's what's so cool about this case.
So how did that change the letter?
Well, the second draft is still professional, but it takes on this much more personal and empathetic tone.
Okay.
So, for example, it starts by saying, "Dear Miss Packard."
Okay, that's a good start already.
Right. It's not just this form letter anymore.
Right.
And then it acknowledges her situation and says, "I am writing in response to your recent letter regarding your transfer. I was informed that you submitted a transfer request and that it has been processed by your management office and forwarded to the housing application office. We are certainly sympathetic and understanding of your desire to relocate."
Wow. I mean, that is a huge difference in tone.
Right. It's so much more human.
Yeah.
And it goes on to reassure her and says that every effort is being made to help her as soon as possible.
Okay.
And it even gives her the contact information for her housing manager and offers more help.
Wow. So they managed to make it personal and caring, but still stay within the rules.
Right. It's this delicate balance, but it's possible.
Yeah, this case study is so interesting because it shows that you can do both.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important takeaway.
Yeah, it's not about ignoring the rules. It's about figuring out how to add that human touch.
Yeah. And I think this idea of empathy can really bridge the gap between all this bureaucracy and the actual people that the system is supposed to help.
It's about remembering that there are real people on the other side of these letters and policies.
Absolutely. And what's so cool is that this public servant didn't stop at just rewriting this one letter.
Really?
No, they actually advocated for a bigger change at HABC.
Oh, wow.
And they pushed for this more empathetic approach to become like the norm for all their communication with tenants.
So just rewriting this one letter could actually have a ripple effect across the whole organization.
Exactly. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear more about the impact of this case and also like what are the lessons that we can learn from this for teaching effective communication?
Yeah, those are great questions. And we're going to dig into all of that in the next part of our deep dive.
Awesome, I can't wait.
So you were asking about the long-term impact of this case study.
Right.
And it's hard to say exactly how much of a ripple effect it had,
Yeah.
but I do think it shows how organizations like HABC can communicate better with tenants.
Okay.
It's about having policies that follow the law, but also really get why empathy is important.
Yeah, so like making that part of how they do things every day.
Exactly, like from their training to how they judge if someone's doing a good job.
Oh, I see, like building it into the whole organization.
Right, because you can't just say, be empathetic. You got to give them the tools to actually do it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like maybe some training on how to listen well and how to see things from other people's point of view.
Right, and especially understanding what people in these communities are dealing with.
Right.
And, this makes me think about the Thompson v. HUD case again.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, we talk about how it made things tougher legally.
Right.
But could it also be like a good thing for how HABC communicates?
That's a really interesting point.
Like instead of it being just a restriction, maybe it could push them to be more fair and empathetic in how they talk to tenants?
Yeah, I mean, clear and kind communication could actually stop some legal problems from happening in the future.
How so?
Well, if tenants feel like they're being heard and treated with respect,
Yeah,
they're less likely to sue.
that makes sense. Like they feel like they're being taken seriously.
Exactly. It's about building trust instead of just being all about the legal stuff.
Right, building relationships.
Exactly. And that leads us to how we teach all this to people who will be working in public service in the future.
Yeah, how do you teach empathy? It seems like one of those things you can't just tell someone to do.
It is tough, but there are ways to do it.
Okay,
One thing is to have them pretend they're in someone else's shoes.
like role playing.
Yeah, like they're the ones dealing with a housing crisis.
So they can see what it actually feels like.
Exactly. And then they can practice writing responses that are legal, but also kind.
So it's not just about knowing the right answer, but really feeling it.
Right.
That's really cool.
And another good way is to have people share their own stories,
Okay.
like times they did well or messed up when talking to tenants.
No, so they can learn from each other's experiences.
Yeah, and it creates a space where they can be honest and talk about the tough parts of the job.
That's really important.
It is.
And this makes me think about how powerful words are.
Oh, for sure.
Like in the case study, just small changes made a big difference.
Yeah.
How do we help students really understand how to use words carefully, especially in public service, where it's so important to be clear and accurate?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
One way is to have them study real letters, like the ones from our case.
Okay.
They can break down the words, see what could be better, and practice rewriting them to be clear, concise, and kind.
Like a writing class just for public servants.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
And it's not just about writing, it's about realizing how words can affect people.
Yeah, like how some words can make someone feel good or bad.
Exactly, like knowing how your words can make someone feel.
Right. So it's about being thoughtful with what you say.
Right, and understanding that every letter, email, phone call can be a chance to build trust and help someone.
That's a really powerful thought.
It is.
I'm curious, what do you think about technology in all of this?
Oh, like how technology can help us teach empathy.
Yeah, because now so much happens online.
Right, well, technology can be tricky.
Okay, how so?
On one hand, it can create distance
Okay.
and make it easy to just send those impersonal automatic replies.
Oh, yeah, I hate those.
But it can also make learning more fun and interesting.
Oh, how so?
Like imagine using virtual reality to practice real life situations.
Oh, wow.
Or using AI to check your writing and give you feedback.
That's really cool.
Yeah, there's so much we can do with technology.
I'm excited to see what happens in the future with all that.
Me too.
So we've talked about the impact of the case study, how to teach empathy, and even technology.
Yeah.
As we finish this part, is there anything you want to leave our listeners with?
I'd say this. When you're in public service, trying to balance legal rules with human needs, it's complicated.
Right.
There's no easy fix.
Yeah.
But if we try to understand people's feelings and put them first, we can do a better job and make things more fair and kind for everyone.
That's a great point.
It is.
And for our listeners, if you were teaching new public servants, what's one thing you'd do to help them be more empathetic and communicate better? We'd love to hear your ideas. This case study is really interesting. It makes you think about how we do public service in general. It's not just about this one letter or even HABC.
Right.
It's about how do we follow the rules but also connect with people like human beings.
It's something a lot of jobs struggle with, but it's especially hard in public service because you're working with people who are going through tough times and they need your help.
Right, they depend on you.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes people think being a bureaucrat means you can't have empathy.
Yeah, like those two things don't go together.
Right.
But this case shows that's not true.
Yeah, you can be both.
Empathy doesn't mean you forget the rules or play favorites.
Right.
It means you understand what's going on with each person and respond in a way that's fair, but also considers how your actions will make them feel.
Yeah, it's like that saying, justice without mercy is cruelty.
Exactly. You can be fair and still be kind.
And honestly, I think being empathetic can make public service work better.
How so?
Well, people feel like you understand them and care.
Yeah.
They're more likely to trust you and work with you
Right. It's about building those relationships.
and getting better results in the end.
Exactly. It's not just about being nice, it's about being effective.
So from your experience, what makes it hard to be empathetic in public administration?
I think one of the biggest things is just how many cases there are
Okay.
and the pressure to get them done quickly. It's easy to just fall into a routine
Okay.
and start seeing people as just files instead of real people with their own stories.
Like you can't see the forest for the trees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another problem is being afraid to show bias.
But,
Like some people think being fair means treating everyone the same no matter what,
oh, I see.
but that's not always right.
Because everyone's situation is different.
Exactly.
And so you need to adjust how you treat people based on what they're going through.
Right. It's about equity, not just equality.
I like that.
And sometimes that means you have to do more than just follow a script.
Okay.
Ask more questions, really try to get the whole picture.
That sounds hard, especially when you're being judged on how fast you work.
It is, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah.
In the end, public service is about serving the public.
Right.
And that means treating everyone with dignity no matter who they are or what their situation is.
That's a really good point.
It is.
So as we finish this deep dive, what's the one thing you want people to remember?
I would say empathy is not just some extra thing. It's super important.
Yeah.
It's not just nice to have at CHANU. It's crucial for doing public service well and ethically.
And it's something you can learn even if you work in a bureaucracy.
For sure, it starts with trying to see things from other people's point of view,
Okay.
listening to what they're saying and how they're feeling, and responding with kindness and understanding.
That's great advice. Thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
We hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about, especially about how empathy can make a difference in your work and life.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
Until next time, stay curious.